the lantern's rest. The rain had been falling since before sunset. A steady silver curtain that blurred the crooked streets of Brackensport into a watercolor of lantern light and shadow. The harbor bells tolled somewhere in the fog, their sound muffled, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Inside the lantern's rest, the air was warm with the scent of rosemary bread and wood smoke. Mara Vey moved between tables with the easy grace of someone who had walked these floors for half her life. She wore her sleeves rolled to the elbow, a leather cord tying back her dark hair, and her eyes, sharp, steady, missed nothing. The inn was nearly full tonight. Dockhands shaking off the cold, a pair of merchants arguing over a ledger, a bard plucking a harp in the corner. Mara liked nights like this, busy enough to keep her mind from wandering, familiar enough to feel safe. She was carrying a tray of mugs when the door swung open. A gust of rain swept in, along with a tall figure in a travel-stained cloak. The hood shadowed his face, but the lamplight caught on the wet leather of his gloves and the hilt of a sword at his hip. He paused just inside, scanning the room, not like a man looking for a seat, but like a soldier checking for exits. Something in Mara's chest tightened. The stranger stepped forward, water dripping from his cloak. "Room for one," he said, his voice low, carrying the faintest rasp, the kind that comes from long days in cold air. Mara set the tray down on the counter. "We've rooms. Coin first." He reached into his cloak and placed 3 silver coins on the wood. They were heavy, old, stamped with the crest of a kingdom that had fallen before Mara was born. She looked up sharply. "Not local," she said. "Not recently," he replied. Before she could press him, a crash came from the far side of the room. The merchant's argument had turned into a shove, and one of them had knocked over a lantern. The oil spilled, flames licking up the edge of the tablecloth. Mara swore under her breath and moved toward it, but the stranger was faster. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, swept the burning cloth to the floor, and stamped it out with the heel of his boot. The merchants stared, wide-eyed. The stranger only straightened, brushed ash from his cloak, and returned to the counter as if nothing had happened. "You're welcome," he said, and there was the faintest curve to his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like a man unused to the shape of one. Mara studied him. "Quick hands for a traveler. Quick hands keep you alive," he said, "especially on the roads I've walked." As she handed him a key, she noticed something strange. The rainwater on his cloak didn't bead and drip like normal. It slid away in thin rivulets that shimmered faintly, as if catching light from a source that wasn't there. She almost asked about it, but his eyes, pale, almost silver, met hers, and the question caught in her throat. "Top floor," she said instead. "End of the hall." He nodded, took the key, and turned toward the stairs. But halfway up, he paused. "You should check your cellar door," he said without looking back. The latch is loose. Mara frowned. She hadn't been down there since morning. When she went to check, she found the latch indeed hanging open, and muddy footprints leading away into the dark. By the time she returned to the common room, the stranger was gone to his room. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe he'd just noticed it in passing. But the truth was, she felt unsettled. He had helped her, yes, twice in the space of minutes. But there was something about him, the way he moved, the way he seemed to see things others didn't, that made her both grateful and wary. And somewhere deep down, she knew this was not the last time their paths would cross. The rain hadn't stopped. By morning, the gutters along Lantern Street were spilling over, and the cobblestones shone like black glass. Mara stood at the inn's front window, watching the city wake in the gray light. Brackensport was never beautiful in the way the coastal capitals were. Its beauty was in its stubbornness, the way the market stalls still opened in the rain, the way the harbor bells rang even when the fog swallowed the ship's hull. She loved it for that. She had rebuilt her life here after the plague, brick by brick, and she guarded it the way a mother guards a child. She turned from the window when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Kalen descended slowly, his cloak dry despite the weather, his pale eyes scanning the room as if measuring it anew. He nodded to her, but didn't smile. "You were right about the cellar latch," Mara said, keeping her tone neutral. "I found it open." He paused at the counter, and muddy footprints leading away into the dark. Kalen's gaze sharpened. "Did you follow them?" "No," she said. "I run an inn, not a guard post." Something flickered in his expression. Approval or disappointment. She couldn't tell. By midday, the common room was quieter than usual. The bard had left for the docks, and the merchants had moved on. Only a few travelers lingered over their mugs. That was when the tremor came. It was subtle at first, a faint vibration in the floorboards, like the passing of a heavy cart. But it grew, a low hum that made the mugs rattle and the fire in the hearth shiver. Mara steadied herself against the counter. "Earthquake?" she asked aloud, though no one answered. Kalen was already on his feet, moving toward the door. He stepped outside into the rain, looking not at the street, but at the sky. Mara followed him to the threshold. "What is it?" He didn't look at her. Not an earthquake. The clouds above the harbor were wrong, not just dark, but swirling, as if something beneath them was drawing them inward. And in the center of that spiral, for the briefest moment, Mara thought she saw a shape, long, thin, and moving like smoke in water. When she blinked, it was gone. Kalen's jaw tightened. "Stay inside," he said, and started down the street. "Wait," Mara called after him. "You know what that was?" He stopped, rain dripping from the edge of his hood. "I know what it could be," he said. "And if I'm right, you don't want to know." He was gone for hours. When he returned, his cloak was spattered with something darker than rainwater, and his eyes were distant. That night, a common room long after the other guests had gone to bed. He was at a corner table, a scrap of parchment before him, drawing symbols in black ash. The lines curved and twisted in ways that made her eyes ache to follow. She stepped closer. "What are you doing?" He covered the parchment with his hand. "Keeping the city safe." From what? He met her gaze, and for a moment she thought he might tell her. But then he said, "From things that don't belong in your world," and stood, leaving the parchment behind. When she looked at it, the ash lines were already fading, as if the rain outside had reached in to wash them away. That night, lying awake in her small room above the kitchen, Mara thought about the shimmer of his cloak, the strange shape in the clouds, the way he had stamped out the fire without hesitation. He was dangerous, not in the way of a drunk with a knife, but in the way of a storm on the horizon. You could pretend it wasn't coming, but it would find you all the same. And if he was tied to whatever was stirring beneath the city, then she had a choice to make. For now, she told herself she would watch him, learn what she could. And if he became a threat to Brackensport, she would do what she had to do, even if it meant betraying the man who had twice saved her in a single night. The rain finally broke the next morning, leaving the streets slick and shining. A pale sun pushed through the clouds, but the air still carried the damp chill of the storm. Mara stepped out into Lantern Street to sweep the front step, her breath curling in the cold. From here, she could see the harbor, the masts of ships swaying gently, gulls wheeling overhead. It should have been an ordinary morning, but the city felt off. The air was too still. The usual clatter of carts and shouts of vendors seemed muted, as if the city were holding its breath. She was still thinking about the strange tremor from the day before when Kalen emerged from the inn. His cloak was fastened high at the neck, and the faint shimmer she'd noticed before caught the light again. "You're up early," she said. "I don't sleep much," he replied, scanning the street. "Not here." A shout came from the direction of the market square. Mara turned to see a boy running toward them, his face pale, his clothes streaked with soot. "Fire," he gasped, "in the lower wards." Mara's stomach dropped. The lower wards were where she'd lived before the inn, where her husband had died in the plague. Without thinking, she grabbed her cloak. Kalen caught her arm. "Don't," he said. "It's not a fire you can fight." She pulled free. "It's my city. I'll decide what I can fight." By the time they reached the square, the air was thick with the smell of burning, but there were no flames. Instead, a black fissure had split the cobblestones, wide enough to swallow a cartwheel. From it rose a thin, twisting smoke that seemed to move against the wind. People stood back, murmuring. A city guard prodded the edge with a spear, only to jerk it back with a curse. The metal tip was pitted and blackened, as if it had been in a forge. Kalen stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. Under his breath, he spoke a word Mara didn't recognize, and the smoke recoiled slightly. as if it knew him. When the crowd's attention shifted, Mara pulled him aside. "What was that?" "Nothing you want near your doorstep," he said. "That's not an answer." He hesitated, then said, "It's a crack in the seal. There are things beneath this city that should never see the sky, and you know how to stop them." His gaze met hers, steady and unreadable. "I know how to try." That night, Mara sat alone in her small office behind the bar, the ledger open but forgotten. She thought about the fissure, the smoke, the way Kalen had spoken to it like an old enemy. If he was telling the truth, he might be the only one who could stop whatever was coming. But if he was lying, if he was the cause, then keeping him here was a danger to everyone. Her loyalty to Brackensport had always been simple: protect the city, no matter the cost. But now the cost might be betraying the man who had twice saved her, and who, she realized with a start, she was beginning to trust. The fissure in the market square had been sealed with planks and guard rope, but the smell of scorched stone still clung to the air. Mara could feel it even here, in the lantern's rest, as if the city itself had brought the scent inside. Kalen had been gone most of the day. When he returned, he carried no pack, no food, only a strip of parchment tucked into his belt, its edges blackened. He didn't speak to anyone, just went straight upstairs. Myra watched him go, her jaw tight. An hour later, the door opened again, this time to admit Captain Rinholt of the city guard. His armor was rain-damp, his expression grim. "Mara," he said quietly, "we've had reports. A man matching your guest's description was seen near the fissure before it opened. We believe he may be connected to other incidents." Mara's fingers tightened on the cloth she was folding. "Connected how?" Rin hesitated. "We think he's a mage, the kind the council outlawed after the siege of Duskfort. If he's here, it's not by chance." Mara thought of the night Kalen had stamped out the fire, of the cellar latch he'd warned her about. She thought of the way he'd stood in the rain, watching the sky as if he could read it. He had helped her twice, and yet she remembered the plague years, the way the city had nearly fallen because no one acted soon enough. She had sworn never to be that person. If Kalen was a danger, she couldn't let her feelings cloud her judgment. That night, she climbed the stairs to his room. The door was ajar, lamplight spilling into the hall. Inside, Kalen sat at the desk, the blackened parchment spread before him. Symbols in ash and gold ink curled across its surface, shifting faintly as if alive. He looked up. "You shouldn't be here." "I could say the same," she replied. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she said, "The guard is looking for you." His eyes narrowed. "And what will you tell them?" Mara's throat felt tight. "The truth, that you're here." She didn't watch them take him. She stayed behind the counter, hands clenched, listening to the heavy boots on the stairs, the clink of shackles. When the door closed behind them, the inn felt colder. The next morning, The fissure in the market had widened. 2 buildings had collapsed into it overnight. The smoke that rose from it was thicker now, and in its coils Mara thought she saw shapes, long, thin, and moving like shadows in water. Captain Rin came to the inn again. "We questioned him," he said. "He claims he can stop it, but he won't tell us how." Mara said nothing. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She told herself she'd done the right thing. She told herself the city came first, but in the quiet, she could still see the look in Kalen's eyes when she'd said she would tell the truth. Not anger, not fear, just disappointment. The iron hold was not a place for the living. It clung to the cliffside above the black waters of the outer bay, its walls slick with salt and shadow. The sea wind howled through its arrow slits, carrying the cries of gulls and the faint, metallic tang of rust and blood. Mara had never been here before. She had never wanted to. But the fissure in the market had widened again overnight, swallowing a cart and half a stall. The smoke that rose from it now carried whispers, faint, sibilant, curling through the streets like a sickness. And the guard had no answers. Captain Rin met her at the gate. "You've come to see him?" he asked, his tone unreadable. "I need to hear what he knows," Mara said. Rin studied her for a moment, then led her through the cold stone corridors. The air grew heavier the deeper they went, until it felt like breathing through wet cloth. Kalen was in a cell at the far end, iron bars between him and the narrow slit of daylight. His cloak was gone, his shirt torn at the shoulder, revealing a faint lattice of scars that looked almost like burned in runes. When he saw her, he didn't rise. "Come to see the monster you caught." Mara stepped closer to the bars. "The fissure's growing. People are dying. If you know how to stop it." "I told them," Kalen said, his voice flat. "They don't believe me. They think I caused it." "Did you?" His eyes met hers, pale and steady. "I caused it years ago. I'm the only one who can end it now." Mara's throat tightened. "Then tell me how." "I need to be there," he said. "At the seal, with the runes. Without me, the city falls." She wanted to believe him. But the memory of the ash ink symbols on his parchment, the shimmer of his cloak, the way the smoke had recoiled from his voice, all of it whispered that he was dangerous. And yet, she remembered the night he'd stamped out the fire, the way he'd warned her about the cellar latch, the way he'd looked at her in the rain, as if measuring whether she was someone he could trust. When she left the iron hold, the wind off the bay cut through her cloak. But it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. If Kalen was telling the truth, every hour he spent in that cell brought the city closer to ruin. If he was lying, freeing him could doom them all. But the guard had no plan. The council was in denial. And Mara, for all her loyalty to the law, could not stand by and watch Brackensport die. That night, she found Finn in the stables. "I need you to listen," she said quietly. "And I need you not to ask questions." Finn's eyes widened. This is about the stranger, isn't it? Mara took a breath. We're going to get him out. The iron hold loomed above the bay like a black tooth, its walls slick with salt and shadow. By day it was grim, by night it was a fortress of whispers. Mara stood in the lee of the cliff, the roar of the tide tunnels below masking her heartbeat. Beside her, Finn adjusted the straps on the pack of tools they'd stolen from the shipwright's yard. "You're sure about this?" he asked. "No," Mara said, "but I'm more sure about what happens if we don't." They couldn't go through the main gate. Too many guards, too much light. Instead, they would take the old smuggler's route, a half-collapsed tunnel that opened into the prison's lower cistern. Sister Elaine had given Mara a small vial of silver-flecked oil. "For the wards," she'd said. "It won't break them, but it will make them forgetful." The tunnel was narrow, the stone slick with moss. The air smelled of brine and rust. Twice, Mara's foot slipped, and Finn caught her arm. At the end, they found the cistern, a vast, echoing chamber where water dripped from the ceiling into a black pool. Across it, a rusted grate barred the way. Mara poured the silver oil along the metal. It hissed, the runes etched into the bars, flickering and dimming. They found Kalen in the same cell as before, but now his eyes widened when he saw her. "You," he said, voice low. "I thought you'd come to gloat." "Not tonight," Mara said, fitting the stolen key into the lock. "We need you." He stepped closer, the lamplight catching the faint runes burned into his skin. "You're breaking me out." "Why?" "Because the city's dying," she said. "And I think you're the only one who can stop it." They moved quickly, Kalen leading them through the lower corridors. Twice, they ducked into alcoves as guards passed. Once, a ward light flared, and Kalen pressed Mara against the wall, his hand over hers, whispering a word that made the light gutter and fade. Her pulse was loud in her ears, not just from the danger. Near the cistern, a guard spotted them. Steel rang in the narrow hall. Kalen fought with the precision of someone who had been trained to end fights quickly. But when the guard lunged toward Mara, she reacted without thinking, driving her dagger into his side. The man fell, gasping. Mara stared at the blood on her hands. Kalen's voice was quiet. "You did what you had to." They reached the tunnel just as the tide began to rise. The water was icy, the current strong. Kalen went first, then Finn, then Mara. Halfway through, the current caught her cloak, dragging her under. A hand seized hers, strong, unyielding, and pulled her up into the air. Kalen's face was inches from hers, his breath ragged. "Don't let go," he said. They emerged onto the rocky shore, the iron hold looming behind them. The city lights flickered in the distance. Mara stood, dripping, her muscles trembling from cold and adrenaline. Kalen looked at her for a long moment, then said, "You've crossed a line you can't uncross." "I know," she said. "Now let's make it worth it." The road out of Brackensport, was older than the city itself. It wound through the marshlands like a scar, its stones worn smooth by centuries of feet, hooves, and wheels. In the moonlight, the puddles between them reflected the sky like shards of broken glass. Mara, Kaelin, and Finn kept to the shadows, moving quickly but not carelessly. The city guard would be searching the main roads by now, and the council's bounty hunters would not be far behind. They had been walking for hours when Finn finally spoke. "We can't keep this pace forever." Kaelin didn't slow. "We have to. The Ash Road is watched." Mara glanced at him. "By who?" He hesitated. Not who, what. They reached a stretch of road where the marsh gave way to low, rolling hills. The wind shifted, carrying with it a faint, metallic scent, like iron left in the rain. Kaelin stopped, his hand going to the hilt of his sword. "Stay close." From the darkness ahead, shapes emerged, tall, thin, their limbs too long, their eyes glowing faintly amber. They moved like shadows given weight. "Wraith spawn," Kaelin murmured. "Fragments of what's bound beneath Duskfort." The creatures lunged. Kaelin's blade flashed, cutting through one in a burst of ash. Another darted toward Finn, but Mara stepped in, swinging the short sword Kaelin had given her. The blade bit into the creature's neck, and it dissolved into smoke. When the last one fell, Kaelin looked at her, really looked at her. "You're learning." Mara's breath was ragged. "I'm surviving." They made camp in the lee of a crumbling watchtower. Kaelin set wards around the perimeter, lines of ash and salt that shimmered faintly in the firelight. Mara sat across from him, watching the way his hands moved, precise, practiced, almost ritualistic. "You didn't have to come for me," he said quietly. "You didn't have to save my inn," she replied. For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then Kaelin said, "I thought you hated me." "I did," Mara admitted. "I still might. But I hate what's happening to my city more." Later, when Finn was asleep, Kaelin told her about the night Duskfort fell, the siege, the bargain, the binding of the Ash Wraith. His voice was low, his eyes on the fire, as if afraid to meet hers. When he finished, Mara said, "You made a choice to save the city. I can't fault you for that." "You could," he said. "You should, because the cost was more than I told you." Before she could ask what he meant, the wards flared, a ripple of light racing along the ash lines. Kaelin was on his feet in an instant, sword drawn, but nothing came. The light faded, leaving only the night and the sound of the wind. Kaelin sat again, but his eyes stayed on the darkness beyond the fire. "We're close now," he said, "and the closer we get, the more it will try to stop us." Mara didn't sleep that night. She kept her hand on the hilt of her sword, watching the shadows, wondering what Kaelin hadn't told her, and why the thought of finding out scared her more than the wraith itself. The ash road ended in silence. Not the quiet of an empty field or a sleeping town. This was a silence that pressed against the ears, swallowing the sound of their own footsteps. Duskfort rose ahead, its black walls jagged against the pale sky. The fortress looked less like it had been built, and more like it had clawed its way out of the earth. The stones were veined with something darker than mortar lines that pulsed faintly, as if the fortress itself had a heartbeat. Mara felt it in her chest, a slow, heavy thud that wasn't hers. They crossed the outer courtyard, where the ground was cracked and dry despite the mist. Statues lined the walls, soldiers in armor, their faces worn smooth by time. But as Mara passed, she thought she saw one turn its head ever so slightly, following her with eyeless stone sockets. Kaelin noticed her glance. "Don't look at them too long," he murmured. "They remember." Inside the gatehouse, the air was warmer, heavy with the scent of ash. The corridors twisted in ways that made no sense. A hallway that should have led to the inner yard instead opened into a stairwell that descended into darkness. Kaelin moved with certainty, as if the fortress itself bent to his memory. Mara followed, but the unease in her gut grew. At one turn, she caught him watching her, not with suspicion, but with something closer to guilt. "What is it?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not yet." They reached a vast chamber at the heart of the fortress. The floor was carved with a circle of runes, each one glowing faintly red. In the center, a crack split the stone, and from it rose a thin column of smoke that twisted like a living thing. The moment Mara stepped inside, the smoke shifted toward her. It didn't touch Kaelin. It didn't touch Finn. Only her. A voice soft, almost kind, whispered in her mind. "I know you." The voice showed her visions. The lower wards rebuilt, clean and safe. Her husband alive, smiling at her across the inn's kitchen table. The city thriving, free of hunger and fear. "Give him to me," the voice said. "He is the key. With him, I can make it so." Mara's breath caught. "Kaelin," she began, but the words died when she saw his face. He knew what it was showing her. "Mara," Kaelin said quietly, "there's something I should have told you before we came here." Her pulse quickened. "Then tell me now." He looked at the crack in the seal, then back at her. "The night I bound the wraith, the plague that followed, it wasn't chance. It was the price. And your husband." The chamber shook violently, cutting him off. The runes flared, the smoke thickened, and the voice in Mara's head grew louder. "Choose," it whispered, "him or the city." The chamber's air was thick with heat and ash, the runes in the floor pulsing like a heartbeat. The crack in the seal yawned wider, and the smoke that poured from it coiled toward Mara, as if it had been waiting for her. "You've carried my shadow for years," the wraith whispered in her mind. "I can lift it. I can give you back what was taken." Visions struck her like blows. Her husband, Tomas, alive, his hands warm in hers, his laugh filling the lantern's rest. The lower wards rebuilt, the city safe, the air clean. All you must do is give me the man who doomed him. Mara's voice was raw. What do you mean, doomed him? Kaelin's eyes were fixed on her, pale and unflinching. Because it's true. He stepped closer, the red light from the runes cutting harsh shadows across his face. The night Duskfort fell, the enemy was at the gates. We couldn't win. The Wraith offered me a bargain. It would destroy the invaders if I gave it lives. Not just any lives. It demanded anchors, souls it could bind to the seal to hold it shut. He glanced at the crack, the smoke curling upward. Binding isn't killing. It's worse. The soul is torn from the body and woven into the seal itself. They don't pass on. They don't rest. They become part of the prison, aware, but trapped, forever holding the Wraith inside. Mara's stomach turned, and you chose. I chose the lower wards, Kaelin said, his voice breaking. The poorest district. The one the council would not miss. The Wraith marked them with plague, so the deaths would look natural. But I had to name the anchors. I had to speak their names into the seal. His gaze dropped. One of the names was Tomas Vey. I didn't know him then. I only knew he was strong in spirit, stubborn, loved his home. The Wraith feeds on that, the will to protect, the will to endure. Those are the souls that hold best. Mara's breath caught. You chose him. I chose 100, Kaelin said, his voice low. But his name, I remembered it. When I saw you at the inn, I knew what I'd done to you. The Wraith's voice slid between them. Give him to me, Mara. He is the key. With him, I can free the anchors, your husband among them. He will walk again. The city will be safe. Her heart pounded. She could have Tomas back. She could have the city whole. Kaelin stepped forward, his voice urgent. If you give me to it, the seal will break. The anchors will be freed, yes, but so will the Wraith. It will burn the city clean and rebuild it in its own image. Perfect. Lifeless. Mara looked at him. The man who had saved her, lied to her, fought beside her, and stolen the person she loved most. She thought of Tomas's laugh, the warmth of his hand. She thought of Brackensport's crooked streets, its scars, its stubborn life. She stepped onto the runes. The smoke surged, wrapping around her arms, her throat. I won't give you him, she told the Wraith, but I'll give you me. The Wraith's laughter was like stone splitting. You think you can bind me? You are already mine. The plague that touched you left my mark in your blood. That is why you hear me. That is why you see me. Kaelin's face went pale. The cellar door, he whispered. The night we met, I felt it on you. You've been an anchor all along. Mara's voice was steady now. Then let's finish it. She pressed her hands to the runes. Light flared, the smoke screamed, and the seal began to close. Kaelin shouted her name, but she didn't stop. The last thing she saw before the light swallowed her was his face, not angry, not afraid, but filled with something she hadn't seen before. When the light faded, the crack was gone. The runes were dark. The chamber was silent. Kaelin stood alone. Outside, the city bells rang in the slow rhythm of dawn. Brackensport woke to a strange stillness. The fishers were gone. The air no longer smelled of ash. The harbor bells rang in the slow rhythm of dawn, and the tide rolled in clean for the first time in weeks. People whispered of a great light seen in the north during the night, a flare that burned through the mist and faded with the sunrise. No one knew what it meant. Kaelin returned to the lantern's rest. The door creaked the same way. The hearth still smelled faintly of rosemary and smoke, but the counter was empty. He stood in the quiet, his hand resting on the worn wood where she had so often leaned. The place felt hollow without her, not dead, but waiting. He could have stayed in the city. He could have walked away, let the seal hold on its own. But the thought of her alone in that cold stone chamber, bound to the runes, her voice unheard, was unbearable. So he went back to Duskfort. The fortress loomed in the mist, its black walls veined with faint red light. Inside, the seal chamber was silent. The runes lay dormant, but he could feel her there, a presence just beyond the edge of his senses, like the warmth of a fire you can't quite see. He knelt at the circle's edge. "You can't hear me," he said softly, "and I can't see you, but I won't leave you here alone." He drew his sword and pressed the tip into the stone, speaking the old words, the same ones he had once used to bind the wraith. Only this time, he bound himself. The runes flared, their light wrapping around him like molten chains. He felt the fortress take hold of him, not his body, but his spirit, tethering it to the seal. The world beyond the chamber dimmed. He could no longer feel the wind or the sun or the sea, but he could feel her, not her voice, not her touch, just the steady, quiet pulse of her presence, like two lanterns burning in the same endless night. Years would pass. The city would endure. And in the heart of Duskfort, two souls would keep their watch, unseen, unheard, but never alone. Kaelin sat within the circle, eyes closed, the faint glow of the runes painting his face. Somewhere in that light, he imagined her turning toward him, and though he could not see her, he smiled.